Tonight, around the world, millions of Christians gather in the cover and cloak of darkness in the nightfall in spaces such as this that echo the reminders for us all, the tomb in which Jesus laid for 3 days. We gather to remember all that God has done in the world, to remember how even in the darkest of moments, God has been with us and is with us still today. When we hear our readings, we cannot help but see this played out. In our reading from Genesis, when we hear of Hagar, we hear her crying out in the wilderness for her child whom she could not save, whom she could not nurture and feed, having been cast away by her only home. When we move into Exodus, we hear similar echoes of pain from the Hebrew children who are cornered between a massive army of Egypt and an impenetrable sea. To be led out of slavery for a moment, to be brought to a moment of almost certain death. When we hear Isaiah and Ezekiel, our two prophets who preached and taught and proclaimed during the Babylonian exile and the time throughout that period, when the nation of Israel was scattered from the promised land out into the wilderness of the world, when they felt that their community identity was dispersed, when there was no way for them to be a united people without a land. I cannot help but hear within their weighted spaces, within their griefs and pain, our own. How those pains and griefs still inflict us today. How many parents know what it feels like for your child to go hungry, to work and strive and to be cast aside and know that there is nothing more that you can do, and yet it is not enough? I cannot help but think that there are millions of parents in this country and around the world that experience that tonight. And what about the pain and the cries that we hear in the Hebrew people of being caught between a rock and a hard place? How too does that stand for us today? Seeking to be liberated from all the isms and the phobias of this world, to be liberated from the weight of work that doesn't fulfill us, that doesn't sustain us, that in fact robs us of our humanity and our dignity. The weight of everyday life, a feeling that there is no way forward. There is only stuck in where we are at. What about when we hear Isaiah and Ezekiel? We hear underneath these words that desperation cry. How does that not also echoed in our world today? How about the people of Palestine and Haiti, Ukraine and Sudan? How about those who are LGBTQIA? How about those who are individuals of color, women? How about our Muslim and our Jewish siblings? We all know in some way, shape, or form what it means to be cast away from our home and to feel that there is no return. Yes, we gather tonight to remember our pains and our griefs that go down into the grave with Jesus. But we don't remain there. Tonight, we gather to remember not just the pain and the suffering, but we gather to remember what God has done already, the hope that has already been fulfilled, and what we have seen God do before. When in Genesis, God creates the world and says it is good. From the very beginning, our Creator said, we are good. When we look at Hagar and her child Ishmael, it is the voice of God that says, "Open your eyes. I will make a way for you where you do not see it. I will raise up a nation from your son." And when she opens her eyes, there's a well of water. What about for the Hebrew children who felt that death was imminent, and yet when they wake up, it is the simple command of God to Moses to raise your hand towards those waters. And where there was no path forward, God made a way and freed the Hebrew children. When we hear in Isaiah and Ezekiel these songs of hope, we have the gift of history to see that this exile did end, and to see that even in exile, when they felt that there was no hope, there was no future for their people, God blessed them. God raised them up. God grew them. They were blessed in a foreign land. The immigrants, the refugees, were somehow able to establish new roots and grow community for themselves, and in the same time bettering the communities in which they now resided. And when they were able to return to the promised land, there too God blessed them as well. We too gather here tonight to remember how God has blessed us, how God has not seen us abandoned to the suffering and the shadows of this world, but how God has journeyed through it with us, how God has been with us from the beginning. And as we retell those stories, as we recount them, it is so that we may take strength, so that we may take hope. In a few moments, we will hear in our gospel reading yet again of others who have experienced pain and fulfillment of hope. We will hear how Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, will come to the tomb and find not Jesus' dead body, not death, but will find an empty tomb. And an individual saying, "Jesus is alive, he is risen, and he goes ahead of you." And it's a moment for them to determine, will they follow or will they dwell in their fear? We know how that story ends because we are a part of it. We know that fear did not hold them back. We know that because we are here. The hope of the good news is alive. And so this night, when we gather to remember, let us remember what God has done, what God has always been doing, and what God is doing now, which is making new ways, which is creating wells of water for us when we are thirsty, when God is in this moment promising us new life and hope where we are at and in the world that we will inherit and build together to come. So that just leaves us, I think, with one question, which is the question the women faced at that empty tomb. Do we choose to remain in the darkness, in the shadow of death? Or will we look outward through that opening in the tomb where the light of a new day is dawning? And will we follow the God who has always made the way, always been with us, and will always continue to be? Will we follow out of the tomb into new life? Amen. Please stand as you are able.